Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Trenches. We take stories from our conversations in the peer groups each week and turn them around into things that we can teach back to other folks. And this week, we are talking all about projects and sort of our top 5 things that we would do if we were running project team these days, because projects and being profitable in projects is one of those really important things you need to do in your MSP. Your project should not be a loss leader for you. And oftentimes we find, especially as we dig into people's finances, it's a little bit of a loss leader, or maybe they're not making as much margin as they should. Both Natalie and I have run project teams, have been in that mix a lot in our tenure throughout some MSP life and all those things. And so that's what we're talking about today, sort of our top 5 things. So Natalie, kick us off. Tell us what your top project best practice or known good practice is.
When we were thinking about all of these things, the top 5, I was trying to go back through and really think about how big we failed at certain things or what we didn't know when we didn't know it, right? And so one of the things that we had to learn over time, but ended up being really important, was SOWs, statement of works and scope of work. And as we got better at that, definitely we got more profitable, but we made some really big mistakes when we originally started doing scopes work, because we just didn't realize the impact of all the little nuances of scopes work. So I put that at my top of the list because one of the things that really killed a lot of our projects was scope creep and not really being succinct enough to say, this is the project and then everything else is not.
Right.
And that really started hitting us hard a few years in, once we realized, man, we were just giving it away.
Yeah, scope creep is a problem. The other thing that I've seen a number of times is when a work gets scoped out by somebody who isn't technically doing the work, or somebody who maybe is like super senior and it can blast through things much faster than others can. And then you think about taking that kind of the happy path, the hey, nothing's going to go wrong and this should take 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours or whatever. And then of course not everything goes right, and you blow right past your budget, and project profitability tanks, because especially if you did a fixed fee project and you scope out things based on, hey, I think this is only going to take us a few hours, and that few hours is eaten up before you even got 10% in. This is one of those areas where I wish you wouldn't ask me how I know that, but the reality is that when you scope things out, and if you are assuming everything is just going to go perfectly well, you're gonna find yourself behind a little bit when it comes to being profitable in your projects.
Yeah, I call them my Voldemort projects, the ones that must not be named. Um, because I can count on the hands of all the ones that uh it was the series of unfortunate events. Did it start off wrong and then we just made it worse every time we touched it. And a lot of it had to do with we were guesstimating budget hours. We were guesstimating how long. We just didn't have the data to really, or we didn't think we had the data to really look at how long did this project actually take us. And we weren't going back and looking at that when we were scoping the next one. We were just like, oh, it's in our head, so it's fine. And what I realized about scopes of work and SOWs is that this isn't just for you as the MSP. This is also to help the client understand what you're actually doing
Right.
and what's included and what their responsibility is, and an estimate of how long it's going to take. And without that, man, it can create some really cranky clients, because IT, it's going to go wrong sometimes. It's never
Right.
perfect. And once we
Yeah.
realized that, it made it better.
Yeah, I mean, the other piece is it creates some cranky techs too, because especially if the tech looks at the scope and says, "Yeah, that's not happening in X number of hours. That's way under scoped." Again, ask me how I know that. But the thing I want you to think about if you're going to take any lesson from our conversation today, is it's okay to miss scope the
Mhm.
project the first time, but learn from that and fix it, and don't misscope it again, right? You're gonna make some educated guesses, and you're gonna be wrong sometimes. Admit when you're wrong, and level up your process so that way you're not making that same damn mistake every single time, because the quicker you learn that, the more likely you are to make some margin on it. Because again, we are in this business to make a little bit of profit, and if you are leaving dollars upon dollars on the table, that is going to be a problem for everybody. So um, lean into that and solve the problems.
So Adam, what would you say your number two is in projects of the project department?
Yeah, number two for me is client communication, and the couple things that come to mind as it relates to this. One, I think clients don't like having IT done to them, right? They want a
Hmm.
partner that tells them what's going on and what they can expect and all of those pieces. But also the second piece of this is where the process needs to live is you need to build a normal cadence of communicating with your clients. And I think the first thing you do, and this kind of goes back to number one, is you sit down with them and you talk through the scope of work, right? You talk through what they can expect and how long it's likely going to take and some of the things that might go sideways, right? And really having an open communication with your clients is really important. And then telling them what's going on and what's going well and where the problems are, like all of those things are also really, really important because the better you can do to keep your client apprised as to what is happening, the more likely they are to be willing to do things like scope change and some other stuff that we'll talk about here in a minute. So for me, that's number two. Natalie, what's your experience been with communicating with clients as about projects and statuses of things?
Yeah, I will say that it's something I struggled with in the beginning when I moved over to the project side. And, projects can get busy. You're probably doing too many at one time. I know I've seen that multiple times. And the communication is what gets left. It's the one that's like, oh, I'll get to it later. And next thing you know, it's 2 weeks later, and the client's like, hey, we don't know where the status is, what's going on. And you're like, oh, really? I meant to send that email last week.
Hmm.
And generally speaking, what I have found is as long as, even if it's going just belly up, even if the project's going wrong, everything you touch breaks the more that you communicate with the client, and at least they know that, it just makes it better. It doesn't make the project better per se, as in the sense of everything's going wrong, but it makes that client experience a little bit better for you because you're keeping them informed. Without that, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what their responsibility is, none of that. And so they're kind of flying blind at that point. And it's not a good feeling. I don't like doing that to myself or my techs, and I sure don't want to do it to the client.
Absolutely. The thing too with all of this is that the better you are at communicating with your clients about what's going on, the less likely they are to leave you about
Hmm.
a project going sideways. And I've absolutely seen clients leave an MSP because of a bad project, right? I've picked up a couple clients like that in the past where the project went completely sideways. The client was frustrated. They're like, hey, why are we even paying these people for anything, right? Because this is bad news for us. And then we would come in and clean up aisle six and get things back on running. And then we had new clients, right? So it's really important to communicate and let them know what's going on and be on the same page, right? That's so much about all of the things. When you think about service, when you think about legal, when you think about projects, is be on the same page with your clients, right? And take a minute to get back on the same page if you get off of it. That's a really important thing for me.
I think the other important thing that I realized is explaining the project and what's going to happen, not in overly technical terms.
Oh yeah,
Explaining it to them in real world application. I used to tell, like, when we were doing complete network overhauls, I'm like, it's the equivalent of me ripping out your spine and basically giving it back to you vertebrae at a time. Like, it's going to hurt a little bit, and warning them that it could hurt a little bit. That even if it goes completely as planned, yes, there's going to be downtime. Yes, there's going to be this, because they don't understand all the tech. Like, you can't just go over all the technical steps with them. You need to put it into what they understand and how it actually affects their business.
absolutely. That's a great call out because the expectation from the client should be that me as the MSP is going to tell them what their users should
Hmm.
expect when we're doing the thing. Maybe they should expect nothing. Maybe they should expect to be down for a day. Maybe they should expect to have to work from home or whatever that looks like. But tell
Right.
them what the expectations should be based on what they will experience and what their users will experience. So that way, when they come in, the user comes to the main contact and says, "Hey, I can't do X, Y, and Z," and they go, "Yep, we knew about that because the MSP is doing a thing, right?" That's a really important piece. Natalie, tell me about number three. What's your number three?
Number three is really about project rates and actually charging for projects. Like you said, we're kind of here to make a little bit of money. You are a business. Giving it away is not fun. And most of the time, when you have budgeted your managed service contract, you are budgeting for maintaining their current network and a couple of tickets here and there, and you're guesstimating that. You are not budgeting for a 6, 12, 20-hour project to be absorbed into that margin. It's just not the nature of how MSPs price. So you have to account for that in the project side. And I see it time and time again where an owner or an MSP is struggling, that their margins aren't, their profit at the end is not great. And I'm like, oh, what's included? Oh, I do everything, projects as well. That's why your margins aren't great, because you're giving away labor. And I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and I think it's more nuanced than that too, right? Because obviously you should charge something for the projects, but the other piece is your project engineers are typically your most expensive engineers, right? If you're paying somebody six figures, even like low to middle 100s somewhere in there, you need to charge a pretty good rate for those kinds of things. So not only should your project rates be your hourly rate, times the expected hours of a project, but maybe hourly rate with a little bit more tacked onto it, right? So if I think about starting an MSP today, I always say that I probably wouldn't roll out of bed for anything less than 175 an hour, no matter what
Mhm.
market you're in and anywhere in the US. There might be a market or two where that's maybe a little bit rich, but probably not. And plenty of markets where that's not even anywhere near enough. I wouldn't even touch a project for less than 200 an hour, probably closer to 250 at this point. What you have to pay your project engineers and pay the people that to run the team and pay your project manager or a coordinator or something like that. Or if you're doing it yourself because you're an owner doing all the things, that's some really high value work, right? You're bringing additional value to your partners that with through a project that they probably need to have done.
Mhm.
So charge a fair but upper level rate for doing the work, especially when you think about all things AI. Well, I'm not going to get into AI today necessarily, but when you use your engineers that are, I like to call it the big brain stuff,
Mhm.
projects land in big brain territory, you need to charge the big brain rates, right? If you're charging 150 an hour and you're paying your tech, 120 grand a year, you're
Yep.
never going to hit the margin you're aiming at if that's all you're doing. So you need to make sure you're charging an appropriate rate, and that you are charging for the project. And then let's take a minute and talk about like fixed fee versus time and materials. Natalie, what's your take on fixed fee versus time and materials? Like, did you guys do fixed fee in your former place?
We did fixed fee. There was a few times that we did not to exceed. I'm also not a fan um, of not to exceed. And then we did a little bit of bill by the hour. I see benefits to both. I am more a fan of fixed fee, but I am more a fan of fixed fee when you have it figured out. So if you're doing an Office 365 migration and you've done 10 of them, and you can go back and look and say, yes, on average, it takes me this long per user, and I'm going to guesstimate correctly, that works out really well. You
Mhm.
generally budget pretty well. If it's something that you've never done before, it's not in your wheelhouse. You talked about AI. You're going to have to research to get it done. That's a little different. That time and materials can work out really well. Where I see the downfall of time and materials is that is the time that I see your clients that know just enough about IT to be dangerous, but not enough to actually do the job, start nitpicking the bill.
Sure.
Why did it take you this long? Why am I paying for you to text me or email me? All of those things. And it's harder for you to include project management time into that, which no matter what kind of project, you need to put in project management time, because there is a lot of communication. That
Mhm.
communication still takes either your service coordinator, dispatcher, project manager, project tech, whatever they're doing, that takes time out of their day.
Yep.
So I think there's benefits to both, and I can see the upside and downside. I'm a fan of fixed fee, knowing that the law of averages, right? You might botch a couple of them, but do really well, and then the law of averages, you're going to hit your margin.
Yeah, if I think about the different types of billing for projects, right? I'm with you. Not to exceed is kind of silly, right? It's because not to exceed could just be a fixed fee project and move on.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: if you overscope it, which never happens, but let's say you think the thing's going to take 30 hours, it takes you 15. Nothing to say you can't write your client a check back or just charge them less at the end of the project. Like you say, hey, guess what? Bank error in your favor, you win $200, right? So fixed fee makes a lot of sense for, like, to your point, all the projects that that you can get done within X number of hours. The important part about the fixed fee side of the world is that again, go back to number one, scoping. Make sure that scope
Yep.
is accurate, and make sure you're not being overly aggressive with the scope, and make sure you're building some padding in. Now, if I think about the time and material stuff, I would never ever do a fixed fee office move, fixed fee new office construction,
Right.
fixed fee things where there's lots of variables, because you can never ever guarantee that that's going to get done in time. And the last thing you want to do is have to do a bunch of scope changes, because MSPs are bad at scope changes anyway. But doing the scope changes is a big pain in the butt. So for the projects that you just it's a little bit of a crapshoot. Yeah, you can't
Mm-hmm.
fix fee those bad boys. And the reality is that all of them, whether it's fixed fee or time and materials or not to exceed, you still need to communicate well with the client, right? Especially if you are doing a time and materials project and you're going to go over budget, you want to have that conversation with the client as early as you possibly can. And if you aren't talking to the client, or if you're scared to talk to the client about the thing, or whatever, you are going to paint yourself into a corner and maybe have done a bunch of work that the client is going to refuse to pay for, right?
Yep.
So make sure that you are having these conversations, especially as it relates to all of this billable stuff as well. Because if I think about the next one we want to talk about, which is all about change orders, this
Mm-hmm.
is another part of it, right? So if we kind of transition into number 4, which is, like I said, change orders, this is one of those areas where, like I said, MSPs are bad at it, right? We don't really like confrontation very much, and sometimes we think that there's going to be some confrontation with a change order. Again, let's revert back to the SOW, right, at the very beginning, and the communication pieces of it, right? If you scope something up properly, and you still need a change order, that's fine. But hopefully you've had some of those conversations early on to basically say, hey, client, if something weird happens, or if there's an outage, or if a vendor doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, or insert other thing here, it's going to be a change order, and we're going to have to bill you more for it. That's a really important piece. And when I was running the project team, my engineers really didn't love having those conversations. They were a little bit of conflict, and the team, they were pretty busy, so they didn't want to deal with that. Usually became either my job to do, or the subject coordinator's job to deal with, or potentially account manager. Sort of depends on what that looks like. But really having a solid change order process in place is really important. Nellie, how would you handle change orders if you were running a project team these days?
I definitely wouldn't have handled it how I started off handling them back in the day. Lessons
Okay.
learned. Too many lessons learned on that one. But I think that there are some circumstances for change orders for sure. So and especially in if you're doing access control and cameras and wiring and any of that, you sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know until you open a wall and then, oh, fun fact, it's a firewall. Yay. Things like that where you're having to, yeah, it's a change order. I have to order more pieces. But in the actual like professional service projects, sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. And knowing that, one of our biggest things is, and I see it, and this is something we talked about over the week and last week in peer groups, is that, yeah, I'm changing them all their computers out to Windows 11. Turns out they have some software now doesn't work on anything but X, Y, and Z. Well, yeah, it's usually medical, X-ray machines, manufacturing, things like that, that some
Specific
software
applications,
where,
yep.
it's some random software that they're using, and then they have to go above and beyond to figure out how to make it work. To me, that's a change order because that should have been in your SOW of, hey, if this happens, we have to evaluate it. and that's going to cost extra. And I think that if I were to open up an MSP tomorrow and say, hey, change order process, man, I would over document it. We weren't good at documenting the reasons why. Why did this happen? Making an actual issue ticket of some sort of, hey, this is why the decision was made. Having and documenting the conversation with the client, and then having a quick turnaround for that change order request. So not ask the customer and wait a week and then send them a quote. It needs to be ready to go. It needs to be, when you have the conversation with the customer, that change order is already up and running, and
Hmm.
all you're doing is as soon as that conversation's over, I'm going to send it.
Yeah, come with that change order put together. This is
Yes.
what this is going to look like. This is the extra time it's going to take. We're actually going to have to push the finalizing deadline back
Yep.
a week or whatever, right? Because a change order might change the pay, right? It might change what you're
Yep.
going to charge the client. It might change the time that you finish it, and in like literal like what day of the month or year
Right.
that you finish it, or it might change both, right? And depending on the change order, even if it's a $0 change order, but it's going to push the project back a little bit, I would probably still do a change order and let them know, hey,
Yeah.
just FYI, we made a change over here. It's actually not going to take us any longer, and we're okay with that. Probably an exception to the rule, really, but it is going to push the project back a little bit. Just FYI, right? And let them know what's going on there. Again, it's all back to communication with the client, right? If you keep good communication with the client, and they know what to expect, and you're doing a good job, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I would say on even if it's a $0 change order, make sure it's documented.
Yep.
Just in general, make sure even if you send them a $0 and it's just changing the deadline or just changing this, get it in writing. Just
Yep.
keep it in writing so that they're not questioning everything later. There's no surprises at the end.
Yeah, and taking good notes in the conversations that you have with the client, especially as it relates to all this stuff, is also really important because there's the better we can do to be professional about all the things is going to help. So,
Well, real quick,
go,
you said something about AI earlier, not getting to AI. Man, if I had Copilot or any of those, facilitators in the meetings and things of that nature in Teams back then, man, my life would be easier. Use them.
yeah,
Have it take the notes and summarize because, man, you're not going to remember. You have too many things going on.
yeah. I used to take so whenever I did an in-person meeting with a client, I would take like a little moleskin notebook and I would actually like
Hmm.
handwrite notes, which actually I found to be pretty useful. And then I would get back to the office or someplace in between, and then I would actually type out the notes and with all of the different pieces. And this went for all the meetings, but whether it was a project meeting or whether it was a client SBR or whatever, and that would send all those things out. Well, now I would still probably take the handwritten notes because
Hmm.
that's just kind of who I am. But I would probably use like a one of those Plod AI devices or whatever to, record what we're talking about, and it can do the summarizing, and I wouldn't have to necessarily type everything back out again. That's pretty intriguing to me. I don't do a whole lot of in-person meetings these days, so I don't have any need for that. But if I was an MSP these days, yeah, I would absolutely want to use one of those types of devices just to kind of help make things a little bit easier on the back end.
Yeah.
So when we think about the project team, there's a number of people that are involved in the project team. So Natalie, talk to us a little bit about roles in the project team and things that you've seen there.
Yeah, so I have found that obviously you have project technicians, and usually they're about a tier two or above. You might have a tier one involved that's like boots on the ground, rack and stack. That's just the ones going out. But what I have found is if you have a project manager, great. But if you have a project manager, that project manager is managing the whole of the projects, not doing the work of the projects. It's hard to manage all the projects, make sure everything is up to date, and be working and trying to communicate and do this and do that. It's very similar to the service manager role, right? You can't be doing the tech and service management, something will fail.
Yep.
And if you're not big enough for a project manager in the sense, having somebody, your dispatcher, you're making them a service coordinator as a whole, just going back and making sure the communication is happening. Because really, it's ultimately about the communication, scheduling, all of that, those things. And then having your project technicians scope out if you have one. If you're the owner and you're doing it all, great, you're the one doing it. But making sure that those project technicians see the SOWs and the quotes before they go out, because that's one of their roles. They need to put their stamp on it, like, yes, this is what is actually going to happen before you present it to the client and try to sell it.
I spent some time as a project engineer, manager kind of person doing both
Mhm.
the roles. And I found that I was always a pretty good tech, right? I liked being a technical person, and I still actually like being a technical person from time to time. And I was pretty good at communication, and I'm pretty good at project management. Like, but I'm not good at doing all three
Mhm.
in a week, especially if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 projects going on, right? And so for me, one of the biggest benefits to my project team was when we put in a full-time project coordinator, right? We said, okay, we're going to move somebody into this role to run the project team, keep them on track, do all the things, do the scheduling of projects from front to back, right? We were very much we're going to schedule the project from, from start to finish. And yeah, we're going to have to move some tickets here and there, but for the most part, we really tried to get the whole thing scheduled all the way out, so that way we could see really what was going on, right? I'm a fan of making work visible, and that doing it that way made that be a reality. Now, yeah, sometimes it's annoying, and most of the time the PSA project modules are hot garbage. It's better, in my opinion, to do that than it is to have multiple different tools, because then you're in and out of a bunch of different tools. The biggest benefit, like I said, was a project coordinator being able to do the communication and the scheduling, right? That was huge for my project engineers. And that way that they didn't have to manage the project and communicate and do all these things. We saw an immediate a bump up in project work being done and projects being closed faster. If you have a really strong dispatcher, and you don't have like they're not dispatching like all the time,
Mhm.
they could probably help with the project coordination, at least with the scheduling of the work, to make life easier for folks. Because when you're going to schedule work for your project team, you're not scheduling in 15-minute increments. You should be scheduling in at least 2 to 4 hour increments, if not a full day, and just go wild on this project and move the thing forward. Not a bunch of little 15-minute tasks, because that's just not a great use of anyone's time.
Yeah, what I found, and this was very typical, especially if it's like networking, you're replacing equipment, you're doing server migrations, all of those things. Those things are after hours. So your project technician, and usually your tier three, which is, that tier three that I feel like just be in the room and you roll the Mountain Dew and throw the Snickers bar at him and close the door, and let him do his thing without somebody following up on the communication or having somebody scheduled the next day. What I found was, man, they got cranky after they spent all night trying to do the project, and then they have to get up and do the communication and everything first thing in the morning,
Hmm.
and they've just spent 12 hours overnight trying to do a project. So it really started making our techs less cranky, and the burnout when we had somebody that was another tech scheduled that morning to like pick up the users that couldn't log in after Office 365, things of that nature, and that you can balance that load. But having someone that's just the hub of the communication and the scheduling, man, that made it so much easier. Also, a lot of the tier three techs, even tier two, sometimes communication is not their strong suit. They're not like, oh, let me go talk to the client. That's not their happy place. So having somebody that enjoys doing that, can look at the big picture, man, that can just up the level of your project delivery.
Absolutely. Back into the AI conversation just briefly, is from at least from an efficiency standpoint, I would think that these days, if I'm a project engineer and I'm wrapped up for the evening, if I'm doing some stuff after hours,
Hmm.
I would want to record a voice note and send it to somebody, and let the AI team, let the AI tool, whatever tool you're going to use, summarize it and kick it over to the project coordinator, so that way that person knows what's going on. So that way the engineer who stayed up all night to do a thing maybe doesn't have to get up super early in the morning. I think that would be a really great way of using some of those tools, and keeping folks surprised as to what's going on. Because the reality is that all things projects, there's a lot going on, right? And our top five, no matter how good or in depth we can get into them in a half hour or so of our time, we're not going to be able to cover all the things, right? So we'll come back to projects at some point in the future, but there's a lot to it. And the better you can get at leveling these 5 things up and doing them well, the more likely you are to have a successful project team. Natalie, any closing thoughts as it relates to all things projects we want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, something to think about, as far as from owner's perspective is your MRR is usually covering a good portion, hopefully more than 75% of your expenses, your below the line stuff. Having that profitable project is just going to the bottom line. So learning it now and learning how to do it well, that is just going to make your company stronger in the long run. So I really challenge everyone to really dive into their process and see where those efficiencies do a 4 helpful list, do a fishbone exercise, do something, but
Right.
really figure out where the pain points are and utilize those tools that you have, SWOT analysis, all of those fun things that we always use to really figure out how can you make it efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah. Get your project team profitable, right? If you're one of the MSPs that says, I don't know if my project team is profitable, or I know my project team isn't profitable, it's time to go fix that.
Yep.
Go spend some time on it, get some eyes on it, figure out where your process is weak, and move on from there. Now, if you are looking for help with all things projects, both Natalie and I, we both work for Pax8. We both spend some time in the peer groups. We also spend a little bit of time in the instructor-led training side of the world too. So, a couple things worth calling out. The first thing is we have instructor-led training for project management, right? We've got instructor-led training about project management as a whole, but we also have a couple things. We have a couple courses, one for ConnectWise, one for Autotask, and we actually have people who've been there, done that, and have earned that T-shirt to help you through those things. Natalie, tell us a little bit about the Pax8 peer group around project management.
Yeah, so we have a peer group just dedicated to project manager role. Let's put it that way. The facilitator is an expert in projects. He's seasoned, and it's a good place to put your project managers if you don't know what you don't know yet. You're building them up to be a project manager. Maybe they're an established project manager, but kind of a lonely role in an MSP. You're the only one.
Yep.
And it gives them a place to have ideas and share knowledge and resources. You can't beat it.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of the nature of our peer groups, right? We've built peer groups specifically for the roles that really only have one or maybe two people
Hmm.
doing, because it's hard to bounce ideas off of other people when nobody else in your company literally knows what you're doing all day. So that's why we have some of the peer groups that we do. With all of that, thanks for hanging out with us for the day, and we'll come back to you next week.